premier industry body and running a future skills prime program for reskilling and of manpower and ensuring that they remain employable. We have been having different centers of excellence also on say technologies such as blockchain, as AR, VR, and similarly on IoT and Industry 4.0. And in fact, the mentors and the people associated with such centers have had opportunities to discuss their plans and how they are going about enriching the ecosystem. So in the session today, we'll begin with the keynote addresses. There are two of them, in fact, and it is my proud privilege, in fact, to introduce the first keynote speaker of the day, Mr. Jonathan Wong. Mr. Wong is the Chief of Technology and Innovation at UNESCAP, that is the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific. He has developed high-profile impact investment initiatives, including the Global Innovation Fund. He supported the establishment of UK National Health Service Institute for Innovation and Improvement. And now, without any further ado, may I request Mr. Wong to give his thoughts on policy priorities to harness AI for social good. Over to you, Mr. Wong.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Honourable Secretary. And let me say, firstly, it's really my honour to speak at this important and prestigious event this evening. And really, may I take this opportunity to thank both the Government of India and in particular the Ministry of Electronics and IT for this very kind invitation. I'm also very humbled to be in the company of such a distinguished panel, and in particular my good friend Deepali from the Rockefeller Foundation, who's really done so much to build coalitions of action for AI, and particularly in Asia. So thank you very much for that. In my role as Chief of Technology and Innovation at the United Nations Commission for Asia and the Pacific, I advise governments on technology and innovation policy and how technology and innovation policy can be harnessed for the SDGs. And with this in mind today, as your Honourable Secretary mentioned, I'll be speaking about some policy priorities that we in the UN think are needed, particularly in Asia, to harness AI for social good. And my hope is that, and fingers crossed, is that my comments today will hopefully set the scene for the other panelists who will be addressing you later on. But let me start by maybe going back in time and going back just 5 years now, when the world signed up to the most ambitious agenda the world has ever signed up to, which were the Sustainable Development Goals, which were a set of 17 goals that were working for the betterment of people, planet, and prosperity, or economy, society, environment, however you want to frame it. And back then in 2015, technology, and in particular frontier technologies such as AI, were really heralded as kind of key, if you like, means of implementation to meet the SDGs. And indeed, there are many, many opportunities from an economic perspective. I remember speaking to a gentleman from a startup in Shenzhen in China who said AI was allowing him to start and grow his business so much quicker because he didn't need to have a new workforce and hire people. From a social perspective, AI healthcare diagnostics are providing really cost-effective healthcare solutions to rural communities who may not have ever had access to doctors. From an environmental perspective, things like AI intelligent transport systems are kind of reimagining how our cities can become greener. So I think there's certainly so many opportunities that, again, help with prosperity, benefit people, and benefit planet. But what's been interesting as we now go to today, 5 years later, very much this kind of, how can I say, the transformative potential of technology. There's been this new narrative, if you like, and the wave of optimism around technology has been tempered by some concern, shall we say, things like the future of work, an evolving digital divide, which I'll talk about more, and of course, the ethical concerns that are arising with AI. So I think, in summary, I think there is good and bad, and government policy in particular has a role to play in directing AI towards social good. So in this context, let me just highlight 5 policy priorities which could potentially harness AI for social good, and I'll also try and kind of bring this to life by giving some practical examples around that. I think first and foremost, connectivity is key. Digital connectivity is the foundation of AI development. However, you look at Asia at the moment, half of Asia's 4 billion plus population still does not have access to the internet. So there is a digital divide. And if that digital divide is not addressed, given that AI is the foundation, there is really this new risk of a new AI divide being built on top of an already increasing digital divide in Asia. So in this respect, last mile connectivity, particularly to the very poorest people and most marginalized, should be a policy priority for government and the private sector alike if we are to develop AI inclusively. Second, I think we need to build skills for a digital age. And I differentiate there between digital skills and skills for a digital age. I think certainly Digital India program in India is a great example of what other governments should be doing to really build digital skills. But given the ethical challenges that I'm sure the panelists will go into later on around AI, I think governments need to also complement this emphasis on traditional skills development, such as STEM skills, to your point on human resources. I think really we need, if you like, the technologists of tomorrow to have ingrained ethical standards, really an understanding of moral philosophy, to accompany STEM skills as well. So I think certainly that should be a direction for skills for a digital age, shall we say. Now, it's very evident to me that there will be people who will be left behind through the frontier technology revolution and through AI. People may lose their jobs. So I think reskilling should be another policy priority. Now you look at countries like Singapore, they're offering personal accounts for adults to buy training to reskill. They're also offering tax incentives to firms to encourage firms to invest in particularly the very lowest paid workers within their companies to actually reskill, because these are the ones who are most likely to be displaced by AI and other such technologies. So these are some really interesting policy examples we're seeing coming through around digital skills and reskilling. I think first we really need responsible and agile regulation that doesn't stifle innovation, while of course safeguarding the public. Now I used to work in venture capital, where of course one of my big frustrations was the regulatory barriers that hindered some of the technology startups that I was investing in. And I think certainly we need that balance. We need to let AI evolve and let innovation flourish, while obviously safeguarding and public interest as well. Now that's very difficult, but I think certainly there are examples of effective practices, shall we say. You look at Hong Kong, where the monetary authority there is allowing banks and technology startups to test their fintech technologies within controlled environments, where they can enter these controlled environments, pilot their technologies with minimal regulatory hurdles, shall we say. And once the technology is proven out, the regulatory barriers increase and increase. So I think that's, again, a very practical and good example of a way that you can safeguard public interest while allowing innovation to happen as well. I think fourth, and probably most importantly for Asia, I think we need a private sector that pursues responsible AI development. And I'll explain what I mean by this. If you look at the past digital revolutions, it was very much led by government-funded innovations. So things like the internet and GPS that we use every day were actually government-funded. Organizations like DARPA in the US actually back these technologies that are now penetrating every part of our economy and society at this moment in time. However, what I think is very interesting, particularly in Asia, is that the fourth industrial revolution, with technologies such as AI and blockchain, etc., is very much being led by private sector investment. And I think certainly if we are to kind of channel AI for social good, I think the private sector needs to go beyond just corporate social responsibility, number one. But certainly governments can provide the right incentives for companies, if you like, to do good as well as do well and make profits. And again, we're seeing some very practical and innovative policy examples from around the region. Where I'm based in Thailand, we have something called the Social Enterprise Act. Now, a social enterprise, as you probably know, is an organization that has an ingrained social mission, be it providing education for all, healthcare services in rural communities, but aims to generate a profit as well. And this Social Enterprise Act provides specific tax incentives to businesses to have an ingrained social mission alongside their profit maximizing motivation as well. So that, I think that's a really interesting model. additionally, in the Philippines, we were working with the government on the Philippines Inclusive Business Scheme. Now, an inclusive business is a business that aims to provide products and services to the very, very poorest people in their communities. Again, in the Philippines, companies who pass this accreditation get very significant tax breaks. And I think this is going to be really important if technologies such as AI are going to benefit the very poorest and most in need, and not just the wealthy and middle class, because that for me is the essence of AI for social good. Last but not least, and I'm mindful of the time now, I think collaboration needs to be at the heart of everything we do for AI for social good. I think certainly a policy priority for everyone should be open and honest collaboration between governments, civil society, philanthropists, academia, the private sector, particularly technology developers, because this will be critical to ensure that AI has a positive impact on inclusive and sustainable development, and that any policies that are generated are well thought through, well-rounded, etc., and meet the objectives of all the stakeholders. So to conclude, again, I'd like to thank the government of India for showing real leadership on this. And with my last point in mind, I think the makeup of this panel is really testament to the collaborative spirit that India is taking on AI. So I think that's really to be commended. And just a final thought, just to say, I think certainly our AI-driven future is certain. There's no question it will happen, but the direction is not. And I think the only way we can direct AI for social good is to work together. So with there, I'll stop. And thank you very much again for this kind invitation, and hand back to you, Honourable Secretary. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wong. I think the points you made about the examples that you gave from different nations, and also the point you made about collaboration is so pertinent to the policy making, and which is essentially in still a nascent stage, but something that we are very conscious of as we try to collaborate with the academia for basic and applied research in the technologies, and also with the industry as we go up and take a sectoral approach and work with the industries to solve problems pertaining to particular sectors, which have, and I'm sure, cross-sectoral impact also. So thank you again. And with this, may I now request Ms. Deepali Khanna, MD, Asia Regional Office, Rockefeller Foundation. Deepali ji leads the foundation's initiatives, policy, advocacy, grant making, and she's also in charge of convening and catalyzing strategic collaborations that advance development in Asia. The topic for her to share her thoughts is building the innovation ecosystem, and I look forward to hearing from you. Over to you, Deepali ji.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Gore, for that kind introduction, and many thanks to the Ministry of Electronics and IT for inviting me to deliver this keynote address. I'm privileged to be at this platform and virtually meet all of you to share my thoughts on building an ecosystem for AI-led innovations to thrive. Now, as a science-driven philanthropy, we've always leveraged the power of data and technology to scale innovative solutions to maximize impact. As the managing director for Asia with the Rockefeller Foundation, this is really very, very important for us. Globally, the foundation advances new frontiers of science, data, policy, and innovation to solve challenges related to health, power, food, and economic mobility. Further, as I share some strategic insights into the Rockefeller Foundation's approach to collaborating for impact, which Jonathan has highlighted as absolutely critical, it is great to see that we have representatives from the public sector, private sector, academia, and multilaterals participating in this discussion today, all of whom are crucial to building this ecosystem. As we look at AI and the fourth industrial revolution to be channelized towards overall human development and welfare, a collaborative effort between all these actors is absolutely imperative. I'm happy to share the stage with such accomplished and inspirational speakers and panelists, including Jonathan Wong from UNESCAP, whom I've known for a long time and has been doing some exceptional work advising governments across the globe on technology and innovation. Jonathan spoke about digital connectivity, skilling for AI, and the directional role of governments in AI development. And in my remarks, I'll cover 4 areas. First, harnessing AI to reset the future. Second, imagining data as the fuel for AI technologies. Third, channelizing the benefits of AI for social good. And finally, humanizing technology for better AI governance. Let me dive right in and begin by discussing how we think we can harness AI to reset the future. Artificial intelligence is a vastly complex topic that is transforming the very fabric of our lives. AI has many virtues as well as many risks, all of which are on vivid display during this time of global turmoil. In fact, the current pandemic is accelerating AI's integration into nearly every aspect of our lives. How we manage AI's role in addressing the crisis and managing our recovery will undoubtedly define the next era. As we reimagine the way forward, we at the Rockefeller Foundation are betting that AI will help rebalance and reset the future in a way that addresses current inequities. To achieve this outcome, we need to reimagine an entirely new rulemaking system that guides AI towards society's goals instead of our current de facto rulemaking system that guides AI towards the market goals. In fact, we need to go a step further and see how the market and governments collaborate to create a system where AI can achieve the overall well-being of society. Last year, we convened a unique group of technologists, philosophers, economists, lawyers, artists, and philanthropists. And we were very privileged that Jonathan had also joined us. This was at our Bellagio Center in Italy, to explore how AI can be harnessed to create a better future for humanity. As a result of this meeting, we recently launched a report, AI Plus One, Shaping Our Integrated Future, which I would encourage you all to read. The report is on our website. It's really a collection of thoughts, ideas, and calls to action on artificial intelligence, written by some of the world's most promising minds in the field, including technology researcher Maya Indra Ganesh and co-founder of New York University's GovLab, Stefan Verhulst. In India, we've been focusing on early field building efforts to create a holistic enabling ecosystem for leveraging AI towards social and development outcomes. We partnered with the University of Chicago's Social Impact Program, the International Innovation Core, to help policymakers embed integration of AI into public health. As part of this work, we focused on getting unconventional actors together to understand policy impediments, to have a holistic and user-centric approach to AI for health. Besides creating an AI culture and governance platform, we also created a body of knowledge and research to define a roadmap for AI integration into health for India, as well as other developing economies. I'm quite humbled to say that our work was recognized by Asia Ventures Philanthropy Network as one of the top 5 collaborations in Asia for 2020. However, simply creating strategies and roadmaps would not be enough. Data availability is a necessary precursor to AI modeling. So let me share my thoughts on why I think data is the fuel for AI and how we are tapping into it. The real challenge of building our transformative and relevant AI goes beyond algorithms, storage infrastructure, or computing resources. It lies in the access to high quality, reliable, recent, and annotated data, and ensuring this access is continuous and in real time. Data availability determines what problems get tackled and what populations get served. Thus, an enabling ecosystem should strive to provide access to such data from government and non-governmental sources, including data from communities themselves. An instance of how we are working to slingshot AI-driven innovations by increasing the value of machine learning tools for the poor and vulnerable is the Lacuna Fund. In partnership with Google.org and Canada's International Development Research Centre, we set up the Lacuna Fund to finance the creation, expansion, and maintenance of labeled localized datasets, beginning with a focus on agriculture, language, and health. It is the world's first collaborative effort to provide researchers, data scientists, and social entrepreneurs in low and middle income communities with the resources they need to produce labeled datasets and build AI applications that benefit underserved populations. Another example closer to home is our work with the Ministry of Electronics and IT. The Government of India's 2018 document on National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence has recommended opening government data sets to achieve AI for all. Since then, India has displayed great foresight in building capacity in data and digital infrastructure. Its research and innovation ecosystem working towards accessible and responsible AI for social empowerment with its partners. The centers of excellence set up by the government, for example, have allowed the network of IITs and IITs to evolve as hubs for innovation. To support the efforts of the Ministry of Electronics and IT in effectively implementing an open data platform with ease of access to data for AI applications, the Rockefeller Foundation is currently working with the International Innovation Corps, who brings in their learnings from the challenges of integrating AI in healthcare in the last 2 years to build the data and tech ecosystem to accelerate the government's AI for all mission. We're working with the external ecosystem of academics, innovators, and sector leaders to understand what an open data ecosystem architecture should look like, and working with the government to action out the recommendations simultaneously to ensure access to relevant data sets. Strikingly, 90% of the data ever generated by humans in any form has been created in the last 2 years. By some estimates, less than 1% of data generated is ever analyzed, largely because humans have a finite capacity to absorb and use information. Advances in artificial intelligence allow data to be analyzed at a formerly impossible level of scale and complexity. For decades now, we've seen the private sector use data and data analytics, such as artificial intelligence, to improve productivity and market impact. However, most nonprofit, civic, and public sector institutions have really not been able to channelize the power of data in the same way. So my next point is really around how do we channelize the benefits of AI to social good? Data and technology can increase the speed, depth, and accuracy of analyzing a social challenge, pointing to solutions, partnerships, and innovative investments that can provide maximum impact, leading to manifold benefits to the society, the most vulnerable communities, and at the individual level. Vadvani AI, for example, partners with farmers to provide AI models that could classify and count pests based on photos taken to improve yields, as some of you may have heard during their presentation this morning at RAISE itself. Pratham Books has worked with AI for Bharat to develop AI tools to create an equitable landscape for underrepresented languages by supporting authors of stories of children in dialects such as Konkani and Maithili more efficiently. Seva Bharat has collected data on agricultural practices and farm use over the years through its women members and has begun thinking about how to analyze this rich data to share insights with women farmers to increase farm produce and income. Startups like these and institutions that I just mentioned are creating decision support systems to empower governments, international organizations, private sector companies, NGOs, and other entities to unlock new markets and deliver products that address the needs of the underserved. They work to address questions such as where do we install a microgrid or a new enterprise to ensure enough demand that the project is commercially viable, while at the same time reaching underserved populations. How do we monitor the casual effects of a new power plant on reduced post-harvest loss or improve public health outcomes, and many more that are being discussed across various tracks at the summit. At the Rockefeller Foundation, we supported a startup called Atlas AI, which is set up by Stanford University researchers to provide economic and agronomic intelligence for emerging markets. The company predicts plot-level crop yields, household wealth, and consumption, and more catering to the needs of financial service providers, agribusinesses, governments, and other organizations operating in data-sparse environments. The role of startups like Atlas AI in helping to improve access to food and other resources by working closely with governments is a testament to the value that technology, innovation, and collaboration can bring in addressing some of the world's most pressing needs. Along with the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, We have also announced a platform for partnerships called data.org that will continue to build the field of data science for social impact. This is the next chapter of a $50 million commitment both organizations made last year to launch a transformational model for philanthropy. With data.org, we seek to build the capacity of nonprofit organizations with training resources, access to data sets, and open source tools that help these organizations harness the power of data insights and predictive analysis to enhance their efforts. The goal is to leverage the technical expertise of the private sector to support civil society organizations. Additionally, we are pioneering AI integration into healthcare with our $100 million Precision Public Health Initiative, which focuses on using predictive analytics to prevent rather than respond to health threats and leverage big data on the social determinants of health, starting with women and children's health. Our aim is really to empower the front lines of healthcare, especially community health workers, using the power of data. For this work, we partnered with UNESCAP to support state governments in using statistical models for forecasting COVID-19 outbreak, and with Pyramid Trust to leverage digital technology to improve health outcomes in the 25 aspirational districts. Further, we know that AI readiness and transformation need a strong foundation of data cultures, behavior, and innovative thinking, which is why we are building capacities of policymakers. To build a data-savvy future leadership and governance ecosystem, we are engaging with the next generation of governance leaders through accelerated learning programs with UNDP's Next Gen Gov and Asia Venture Philanthropy Network India Policy Lab. Our goal is really to empower public sector agents of change and to increase the state's capacity in executing and achieving impact goals. Under the Next Gen Government Initiative, both Rockefeller Foundation and UNDP are working together to support champion policymakers of Asia, embarking upon a learning by doing journey on the future of governance. This collaborative platform truly enables dialogue, learning, sharing, and action towards data and AI-driven policymaking. We've been working with our Next Gen Gov champions, Jayesh Ranjan from Telangana, who spoke earlier today, and Senator Pia Cayetano in Philippines, towards prototyping data-driven policies towards anticipatory governance models and food security. In Philippines, along with UNDP's Regional Innovation Center, we've launched the FinTech Lab, which means heartbeat in Filipino, to harness data innovation for effective COVID-19 responses and future crises. With a key feature of measuring the country's socioeconomic health in response to the government's COVID-19 amelioration program, working closely with multiple ministries. AI is often described as the new electricity, a general purpose technology reshaping business and societal landscape. As AI-related technologies penetrate even ever more aspects of society, the management of AI will be a societal challenge as well as a technical one. If left unchecked, AI technologies can ignore human rules and norms, diminish privacy, manipulate or addict people, promote the spread of disinformation and group polarization, amplify societal biases, and exacerbate wealth inequalities. At the same time, we can harness AI technologies to improve healthcare, government operations, scientific research, and confront such global challenges as the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. This dichotomy of AI's positive and negative impact on society brings me to my last point on the need for humanizing technology for better AI governance. We live in a world where AI governs access to information, opportunity, and freedom. However, AI systems can perpetuate racism, sexism, ableism, and other harmful forms of discrimination, therefore presenting significant threats to our society, from healthcare to economic opportunity to our criminal justice system. In practice, design choices determine the effectiveness and flaws of AI. No matter how good the technology is, it's the positive and negative impact on people we ought to care about. These AI technologies need to be used in a critical and well-informed manner with intelligent safeguards in place and an eye on outcomes and a balance of risk and reward. Helping institutions use AI well should really be a priority. As the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji mentioned in his inaugural address earlier this week, it is our collective responsibility to help establish trust in AI technologies by ensuring transparency and accountability. Whether AI becomes an overall positive or negative force depends on the approaches we use to govern it. We use a broad definition of governance that includes ethical norms, regulatory structures, and institutional arrangements. Appropriate governance ensures that societal benefits of AI outweigh the risks while ensuring the evolving legal and regulatory systems do not pointlessly impede AI innovation. In collaboration with the Schwartz-Reisman Institute for Technology and Society at the University of Toronto and the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University, we at the Rockefeller Foundation are holding a series of convenings over the next few months to explore issues related to the future governance of AI and to shape concrete prototype projects. We will convene a community of experts and leaders to articulate, prioritize, and lead the execution of a set of collaborative prototype projects intended to drive the development and implementation of a new AI governance approach. In practice, what this means is that there is a need to build awareness, develop governance structures, ensure diversity within teams tasked to build AI systems, and educate users and developers of the pitfalls of an unbiased system. As most AI practitioners and experts would understand, making AI ethical is an ongoing process and requires continuous monitoring. Companies need to understand these frameworks at the early stages of technology development for simultaneous implementation and improvisation. It is no longer about the technology alone, but the humanization of technology, and there's never one right answer. In my concluding remarks, what I'd like to state is that today we are really at an inflection point in the way data and AI technologies are used. A 19th century farmer would find it hard to imagine the advances made possibly by fertilizer, irrigation, improved varieties, and mechanization. Similarly, changes unimaginable today will occur in the coming years using data-driven technology. They will be at least as fundamental as those brought by the Green Revolution, for which the Rockefeller Foundation had supported significant field building work with the Indian Council of Agricultural Research in the 1950s and 60s. Unlike those changes, these will impact almost all places and spheres of life, which is why it is critical to get this right. Philanthropic foundations play a critical role in driving impact, as we are uniquely positioned to have a catalytic role for the entire stakeholder ecosystem. More importantly, foundations such as ours have the privilege of envisioning and converting into real action large-scale systemic transformation, be it ending energy poverty or disrupting healthcare delivery with technology. The work of foundations is more than just our capital. We have networks, technical expertise, knowledge, and convening power. We at the Rockefeller Foundation are leveraging these trends to forge effective collaborations between different stakeholders to drive collective action. I want to sum up by reiterating the 4 pillars of building an ecosystem that I discussed today, including harnessing the power of AI to reset the future by integrating it in our development agenda, imagining data as the fuel for AI, channelizing the benefits of AI for social good by capacity building of CSOs and policymakers, and taking into account the considerations around AI governance. It is imperative for individuals, businesses, governments, nonprofits, and philanthropies to come together to ensure there's a coordinated effort to change how we look at a sustainable future. Everyone has a role to play in enabling ethical AI-led innovations to leapfrog human and environmental development towards an equitable future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Khanna, for a very illuminating presentation. Rockefeller Foundation has been a very valuable partner of the Ministry of Electronics and IT, and indeed not just this ministry, but entire government of India, as well as the state governments. You talked at length about open data architecture, and I'm sure that you're aware, and the panel is aware, that Government of India came with National Data Sharing and Accessibility Program, NDSAP, where data availability and ease of access in real time uh, is a prime feature of that program. We in the ministry view data not just as an economic commodity, but as a public good. And that is where probably channelizing access for greater societal benefit is being pursued through public digital platforms. For example, recently the Honorable Prime Minister announced the National Digital Health Mission. There's a Digital Agriculture Mission. There are a host of other initiatives apart from the having the unique entity as well as GSTN and so many other artifacts which are essentially building on the huge data sets that are available with us. Finally, just to conclude, I believe the report that the foundation has come up with, the AI +1 shaping the integrated future, will act as a primer for policy making and implementation. With this, I thank you once again. And now it is with great pleasure that I invite Mr. Ravi Narayan as a moderator for the panel discussion. Mr. Narayan, as you're aware, he wears many hats. He is the CEO of T-Hub, which is the state of Telangana, which has been the institution that has spurred the startup ecosystem in the country and given an opportunity for government to engage with them in a very structured manner. He's also the Chief Innovation Officer, state of Telangana. He has pioneered the venture capital catalyst the venture ecosystem and the startup accelerator space. In his earlier avatars, he has helped Microsoft build the accelerator program for China, Europe, Israel, a host of other places. So I welcome you, Mr. Ravi Narayan, and invite you to lead the discussion on the topic infrastructure for AI-led innovation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Gaur. It's an honor to follow Mr. Wong and Ms. Khanna on this discussion. They summarized where we are today in terms of adoption of AI to social empowerment in a very, very effective way. And I welcome all my fellow panelists. I'll introduce all of you in a little bit. But I just wanted to also point out that several of us have met in the past. And I think it's the same set of people who are thinking through how we need to really take advantage of all the opportunities that are presented to us at this point in time. I know Professor Muna and myself were in a conference for IITs, Pan IIT, discussing the good and the bad side of AI. And while it was a very interesting conversation, we had multiple discussions about the change in workforce, change in the way we need to be reskilling and applying these to the for social good and so on and so forth. We went into a pandemic, and as Ms. Khanna said, we're at an inflection point. We have the good, obviously, already happening in some manner or the other, but then there's also the bad that is catching up in a much faster way. The ability for us to harness the data repositories, the harness the adoption of AI as a technology is a challenge, because as much as we think that we are doing something, we are also being pulled into using this on a personal basis, where we are, whatever we talk about privacy and security of data and so on and so forth, is actually being tested every step of the way. So I know this discussion is a very timely discussion, and I think we couldn't have a better set of people that could be on the panel having this discussion with us. I also wanted to point out what Ms. Khanna said earlier, that we have tried our level best to actually harness the technology for the betterment of not just the corporate sector, the public sector, academia. We're also trying to see how we can create a showcase of how this is best done in the state of Telangana. And there was a panel on this. In addition to that, we also presented a few startups that have actually been able to layer on top of the infrastructure that has been created to really do what we intended them to do in terms of creating social empowerment. But the acceleration doesn't give us too much time to actually make these choices as we go along. According to OpenAI, the amount of compute used in the largest AI training runs has been increasing exponentially with a doubling of 3.4 months, and that's shortening even further. This trend will continue to increase the demand for high compute facilities. IDC predicts that the global data sphere will grow to 175 zettabytes by 2025, a 10x growth from 2017. We're looking at the investments in intelligent automation, IA market, significantly going up. Overall spending is expected to reach $232 billion by 2025. So the amount of investments to really build out this infrastructure is continuing to grow. How we leverage this infrastructure for ourselves, I think, is going to be the challenge for us to not just shape, but also make sure that we are able to guide our trajectory in that fashion. So with that, I would like to invite my fellow panelists to the panel discussion. I have a very well-represented panel, as I mentioned, Mr. Marco Alexander Breit. Mr. Breit has held diverse portfolios in the Saarland State Chancellery, including the head of office of the state chancellery, minister for the federal government, culture and the media, and the head of the office of the prime minister. He headed the Department for Digital Policy Principles and Coordination at the Federal Ministry of Economics and Technology before pivoting to his current role. We have Mr. Fabian on the panel. Unfortunately, he can't be here physically, but he has sent us a video. Mr. Fabian is a technologist who currently runs UNICEF Ventures and makes investments into open source technologies that can provide solutions to societal problems, particularly those facing children. His innovation unit's research and development priorities focus on the near-term challenges in the world's most difficult operating environments. The unit also crafts strategic options for innovation on a 3 to 5 year horizon. We also have Mr. Keith Stryer. Mr. Stryer works with senior leaders from across public and private sectors and in all markets to help them understand the new art of the possible when AI, GPU accelerated computing, autonomous machines and IoT are deployed at scale. In addition, he leads NVIDIA's AI Nation initiative, assisting governments to acquire the AI infrastructure they need to realize their AI plans, whether to improve the citizen experience or to build an AI megacity that transforms urban living. We have Professor Rajat Moona. Professor Moona recently started at IIT Bhilai after almost 30 years as a professor at IIT Kanpur. Previously, he was the Director General of the Center for Development of Advanced Computing, the pioneer in India's first supercomputer. And then I also have Mr. Rahul Sharma. Mr. Sharma is a strategist, business and change leader, design thinker, cloud enthusiast, and tech evangelist. He's an elected member of the NASSCOM Executive Committee and nominated as a governing member of the NASSCOM Sector Skills Council. Welcome to all my fellow panelists. Just to get things started, I thought it'll be good to get a one-word reaction to what does infrastructure for AI-led innovation bring to you? What is that one word that comes to your mind, Mr. Breit?
Well, thank you. First and foremost, thank you for having me and making me contribute today. It's a great honor. It's a great pleasure. The one word that comes into my mind is actually not infrastructure. It's actually ecosystem. And I can elaborate on that because I think the infrastructure obviously is needed. It's fiber, it's cloud computing, it's the acceptance of edge and small and medium businesses. So it's a broad kind of infrastructure that is needed for AI to flourish. But in the end, infrastructure is nothing without the ecosystem. And from a European point of view, I can say that if we want to set up an ecosystem, for example, like Shenzhen or the Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, it's very difficult to do because Europe has a lot of member states. They have a lot of highly important and attractive capitals. There's a lot of intelligent people living in Madrid, in Paris, in Sweden, in Stockholm, or in Toronto or in Florence. But if we want to set up this infrastructure, this ecosystem, the ecosystem where people, ideas, and venture capital meet and have success by opportunity, success by happenstance, it's just not possible for Europe. And I imagine it's quite the same for a large country like India. So what we actually should do is taking that infrastructure layer, making the infrastructure layer interoperable, making data easily migratable, and foster the connectivity that Mr. Wong emphasized in his part too, because this is essential. If you want to make ideas happen, if you want to bring business models to your customers, then you need an infrastructure, but you need the opportunity to bring these ideas within a larger group of people and customers too. And this is the ecosystem. I think, and this is probably why in my mind it's more separated. The infrastructure part is obviously you can fund this by governmental money, but in the end it's corporate business, right? You need cloud adoption in broad economy. You need fiberglass. You need the embracement of edge for new customers, and you need microelectronics, semiconductors, all these things. That's business. Government can help, but it will not be able to make it alone. But the AI ecosystem is something that we can really foster. Foster, for example, by public funding. Foster, example, by creating an environment of trust based on rules and regulation that embraces innovation. And is the other thing that's needed there, and that's going to be the responsibility of businesses again. We need to make clear what the benefit of AI is for the people and for business to use it. If there is something like this broader idea, AI is going to help us with coping with COVID, coping with synergies in my businesses and all these things, that's good and fine, but we need clear use cases for AI and we need to show how it really, really helps us with the problems that we are here. And then both things, infrastructure and the ecosystem, can grow together, and innovation will be at the end of that path.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Breit. That was very illuminating. Now that you have used the word ecosystem, I want to see what other words come up from my other fellow panelists. So, Mr. Stryer, what's that one word that comes to your mind when you think of infrastructure for AI-led innovation?
Well, first off, thank you again, sir, and for the government for organizing such a great session. It's very hard to follow the answer from my colleague in Germany, since that was a very comprehensive answer that covered all the really good topics. But so my answer is going to be action, actually, and let me just double click on that. So first, I agree with everything you just said, right? So the recipe for national AI strategies and success in that area. It isn't just infrastructure. Actually, we think about it in four main ingredients. You need your AI strategy, you need your vision, you need AI policy and all the things that flow in that, regulations and so forth. You need your AI ecosystem, as Ravi was pointed out, and that ecosystem has to sit on top of an AI infrastructure. And you really need those four components to realize any value or benefits for your citizens. And there's lots of other things around that, but again, it was just well covered in the first answer. But what I have found in my work with governments around the world is also the need for action, the need to sort of shift your mindset from talking about AI policy to implementing AI programs. There's a lot of great white papers out there. A lot of countries have articulated strategies. I've read the one from India, cover to cover. And in fact, I just interviewed Arnab Kumar, one of the co-authors of that white paper just the other day. So there's lots of great white papers out there, but what really will distinguish the countries who will really benefit from AI, and where the citizens will benefit, frankly, is where the policymakers have moved towards action, and they are making investments. Again, as my colleague from Germany was saying, it's really about leveraging the tools of policy and leveraging the position of government to spur innovation and adoption in the private sector as well as in the public sector. Both are very important. And you know, I do see a distinction between the countries that do a little bit more about talking and speeches and the countries where they're doing a lot more action. Some of those are the same. And some of those are not. Some of the countries who are taking the biggest, boldest steps are actually being quite quiet about it. So I think action is key. And over the next decade, those countries that do make those investments, I think, will experience much more benefit in their national economy. So I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Strayer. Professor Moonam, so there was action and then there's ecosystem. So I would like to get that one word that comes to your mind when we talk about infrastructure for AI-led innovation.
I think it is absolutely clear in my mind that in the time to come, AI is going to be everywhere. It's going to be pervasive. It is AI for all, which is the theme for today's conference. And therefore, the one word that comes to my mind is, I think, education, partly because I belong to the education sector. But I think a huge requirement is to actually create professionals ready for tomorrow's world. And tomorrow's world is going to be, all around with AI, and therefore people well versed with artificial intelligence, techniques for artificial intelligence is going to be a very big thing. The second thing that is actually going to happen, and it's kind of ironical or it's kind of very interesting to say that artificial intelligence, all applications of artificial intelligence are to sustain the natural intelligence. So AI for NI. This is absolutely what we are looking for. And everything that we are talking about, whether artificial intelligence in healthcare, artificial intelligence in agriculture, artificial intelligence in food security, artificial intelligence in defense, artificial intelligence in supply chain, in manufacturing, in all kind of things. This is all oriented towards making our lives better. And in order to do that, any algorithm, any application requires real data. And data, making the data available for the algorithms in order to be able to make better algorithms, better learning systems and all that is going to be yet another key. So can we actually look at algorithm exchanges? Can we look at data exchanges? Data, when we actually look at things like diversity of data, we look at the integrity of data, we look at the privacy of data, we look at the anonymity of data. All of these things are very, very important. Can we actually think of creating data exchanges where people can actually trade data in support of AI? And this is, I think, immediately comes to my mind, people and data. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Moonam. And finally, I'll come to Mr. Sharma. We have had action, education, ecosystem so far. What's that one word that comes to your mind, Mr. Sharma, when you think of infrastructure for AI-led innovation?
Thanks, Ravi. I'll just probably start with just completing also my introduction. It was missed out. I'm also the president for Amazon Web Services for India and South Asia. And that leads to the one word that I want to say is cloud, obviously, with a little bit of bias from my side because I do represent AWS. But I think it's important to note that I made this point in my keynote day before yesterday here as well. It's important to reiterate that point that machine learning AI has been around for 40, 50 years, but why has this suddenly become in the last 5 to 10 years? What is the reason for this to come to the fore so much? And yes, there has been an explosion of data, but also the availability of the public cloud. AWS literally was the inventor, the creator of the public cloud in 2006. And the availability and the democratization of availability of resources through the cloud, I think, has played a very, very important part in progression of AI. The technology that earlier used to be available only to a handful of few large companies or educational research institutions, that same technology now, because of the pervasive access of cloud, is available to students. So, in India, we have, as an example, we provide education using programs, AWS Educate program, and we also then provide them with access to technology, the same technology that's available to the largest of our customers across the world. They get to play with the same latest technology as well. And, that's, I think, the power of bringing all of this together using cloud. You don't even need to, with tools that are available on cloud today, you don't even need to know coding to be able to do machine learning applications. Yes, we have tools available. If you are the deepest data scientist, yes, we have those tools available as well. But it's our mission to be able to provide access to the learning, to the tools that are required for machine learning to every data scientist and every developer in the world. And I think that, to me, is the one word that I would like to describe this with, which is cloud. Thanks.
Great, Mr. Sharma. Thank you very much. So I think we have different perspectives, as you can see. Not only do we represent different stakeholders that are going to build this ecosystem, but also we bring in different perspectives on how this is going to be created and what we feel are the one way of actually taking this thing forward, while other things also follow. But the interesting thing is we pretty much covered the same set of things. It's just that one of those are actually the leading items in our mind. So with that, I would like to begin to ask a little bit more about the roles that each one of you are playing in your organization and the way you're working on the infrastructure for AI, so that innovation is facilitated through this. So let me start with Mr. Keith this time. Mr. Keith, please share your experiences working with world leaders from various countries to prepare them to adopt AI strategies and initiatives.
Yeah, well, thank you. Appreciate that. This is such an amazing time for the technology industry and certainly for India. The academic field of AI has been around for many, many decades, but the modern era of AI is really just beginning. And why is AI the most important technology force of our time, which is how we like to think about it? The answer is that computing, is the technology of automation, and automation drives productivity and growth for industries, not some industries, but every sector of the economy. And this includes the public sector, right? The business of government. Now, every country is unique. Every country's national AI strategy is unique, but all countries have universally prioritized AI. In fact, I would say there's a global policy imperative to implement national AI programs, and this really and this does not include just the largest countries in the world. I work with countries from Malta to Vietnam, Chile to Japan, India, of course, to Egypt, Serbia to Canada. It's truly countries of every size, and that's because they realize it's not just about AI, right? This is not just a technology conversation. This is about competing in the global digital economy, and that doing so requires a genuine commitment. Again, back to my colleague from Germany, to growing those AI ecosystems and the domestic infrastructure that they sit on top of. Now, the reason for this is really simple. Government leaders want their citizens not only to participate in the age of AI, but they want them to benefit from it, right? Now, another observation is that governments realize that the very concept of GDP, which it's sort of anchored to this dated notions of industrialization, and that growth requires more than cement, right? It's not just about building roads and bridges. If I can be more blunt about it, AI infrastructure is the new critical infrastructure. And AI supercomputers in particular, which are really among the most complex machines that exist in the world, have long been the engines of scientific discovery. But now they're more than tools for scientists. They are now the engines for commercial innovation, from the cloud to the edge. And let me unpack that a little bit. You know, what does that mean? Well, every national AI strategy is unique, but they all center around sort of a common framework and a common theme, which is to harness AI to drive economic growth. And you know, whether it's to help youth realize their potential or to improve urban life or rural communities, to attract foreign talent and investment and to spur all that innovation, both among the industrial, sort of the established industries as well as startups, you need AI to do that going forward. And frankly, while the infrastructure behind AI is primarily in the cloud today, as AI becomes more and more infused into our everyday life, the architecture behind it also becomes more distributed. So the cloud and the data centers, they will remain the heart of our digital economy, but the specialized infrastructure that makes AI possible will now increasingly be embedded at the edge, right? Into diagnostic medical scanners in hospitals or autonomous trucks on the road, satellites in space, tractors on farms, even the pizza delivery robots that are going to be running along the sidewalks. Now, governments have also come to appreciate that specialized stack also is more than just about commercial innovation. It's also the new instrument of public service innovation. And that's another reason why there's so much energy around this, right? So whether it's creating conversational agents, AI agents to expand and improve access to public services, and I know a big issue in India's language translation, for example, that's you leveraging NLP to make government services more accessible. That's a very important part of the mission. Using intelligent systems to accelerate, say, benefit payments, for example, or detecting infectious disease, which is obviously on everyone's mind. Even combating tax evasion. The use cases are really, really limitless, right? So solving the world's most complex problems requires AI, point blank. And AI requires more than chips, more than CPUs and GPUs. It requires what we refer to as a full stack of highly specialized hardware and software that has been engineered and optimized to these specific domain problems. And what I find most exciting and humbling about what we're doing in NVIDIA is, we not only get to invent amazing technology, but have the honor of working side by side with governments to really democratize access to it. So I'll hand the mic back.
Thanks, Mr. Srab. With that, I would like to move on to Mr. Breit. You alluded to a lot of the work that you are doing already as the head of the AI task force. I just wanted you to elaborate a little bit more on the vision that you're pursuing there in Germany, and also your experiences so far. What's working? What are the challenges that still remain as you implement that vision?
So first and foremost, me and my team, we are working hard on establishing that ecosystem all over Europe. There is a cloud infrastructure project now that has been started in Germany with our support, and we were driving it. This is Gaia X, and it should be kind of the next level infrastructure for data applications and AI. We try to set up a federalized cloud infrastructure by bringing different cloud computing and infrastructure providers together, make them join an ecosystem, not an ecosystem, an infrastructure that's interoperable, where data is easy migratable, and where you can set up data spaces in a trusted environment. And this is harder as it sounds. I can tell you that because there's a lot of business interest here. And in the beginning, it was a political question. Okay, there is something we need in Europe, and this has been mentioned already, I think, by Mr. Strier. It's data accessibility. And that's what we are lacking in Europe as of now. And this ecosystem should enhance us to get data to our businesses, to our data application innovators. So not only because I think the data-driven economy, the data economy, will be driving our economies in the next 20 and 30 years. So we need to take action there. It's without question. But I think that this is honestly something where Europe, which has always been very good at regulation, can actually make the first step when it comes to an ecosystem of trust and an ecosystem of excellence, which is by chance, not by chance, but on purpose, the wording of the European Commission when they want to set up an AI ecosystem. It's both sides. It's innovation, excellence, and trust. So building this ecosystem is a huge task that we are trying to tackle together with more than 300 companies right now, and we try to set up an organization that helps us foster these themes. There have been a lot of participants right now. We are over 100 right now that tackle this ecosystem and try to forge this federated infrastructure together. So the second thing is, this is regulation. I already mentioned it. The problem with regulation is that I am personally of the opinion that products sell ideas. If I have, take for example, the iPhone. The iPhone was there and it had an ecosystem. By now, 10 years, 14 years later, we use the iPhone or its competitors, obviously, from Samsung, Google, just to mention a few, to be fair. They have an ecosystem. And this ecosystem gave birth to a lot of innovative ideas. And what was first was the device. It was the device and the ecosystem, and then came the ideas. So my point here is, if we try to regulate things like AI, we need to take into account, first and foremost, that the regulation should not only be regional, because if it's only regional, then there will some people somewhere that go around these regulations and they have great ideas and they bring product to the market that will be adopted by the people living in your country, or you did a different regulation and you kind of harnessed your own business ideas. The second thing is, when it comes to AI, there is a lot of, there's a trust issue. There is a lot of fear. Jason coming with that topic. So I think in that field, AI, which is so important for the businesses, for the people, for society, actually regulation should focus on trust. Because otherwise, the innovative ideas, they will go into the wrong direction, and we need to give them some basic guidelines. What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? Because as I said, both sides of the coin, innovation and trust, need to go hand in hand. The third thing, what I'm working on, and which is difficult to implement, is funding. Because I think, again, Mr. Strier already mentioned that there's a lot of AI strategies and a lot of people do different things, but in the end we do all the same. We try to bring intelligent and bright minds into our own ecosystems, which is academia, for example, try to fund these more. Then we try to regulate something, so everything is aligned with, for example, European Union, for example, with the WTO, for example, the OECD, all these things. And then there's the funding, and you want to go spend money on ideas. But as I said, if you want to fund things, then you probably need to fund data spaces, because data spaces is where the innovation takes place. If you fund companies, that's not going to go to work because of competition issues. And if you single out some companies, maybe the innovative companies is not the one that you fund. So our approach is to fund ecosystems and to fund data spaces and cooperation and collaboration within these data spaces. We say, for example, we give a certain amount of money to a group of companies together with academia, small and medium businesses and startups, bring us an idea that's good, that's going to work from a business point of view, and that brings something that nobody ever made before. And then we might, there's a competition there, obviously, but then we might fund you and give you kind of a step up to lower the entry point of cooperation there. And I think this approach, funding data spaces, is by far the best one.
So, Mr. Breit, just a follow-on question. So, given what you have done so far, have you been able to attract the kind of innovations, innovators, startups to actually come in and leverage what you have rolled out so far?
This is difficult to answer because we are lacking two more things to make this approach really successful. The first is European Union has to work hard on fulfilling the promise of the digital single market, because otherwise you have 27 markets and it's very difficult to scale up, especially for startups. I know personally like 4 or 5 German startups with very bright ideas, and they have very good business concept. But if they were starting their businesses in the United States, there would be a $12 billion business right now. And in Germany, for example, this is a $3 billion business. Why is it so? Because there's a lack of scalability, and there's a lack of venture capital, and the embracing of the capital market to go in this direction and accept 80 times sales market capitalizations. That's the first thing we are lacking and where we need to work hard. And the second thing is this acceptance and use of AI and of data-driven applications in the broader economy, and especially in small and medium enterprises, is something that we really need to work on, because this is the market and this is where the innovation can take place afterwards. If they are enhanced by AI, innovation takes another step upward. So we try to tackle this with so-called AI trainers that we send out to small and medium businesses, and we have 3.5 million of them in Germany, which is quite a number, but from Indian perspective, maybe not so impressive. But we bring the idea of data applications, of AI applications to the small and medium business, and we try to tell them, oh, look, there is a technology that could actually help you, even during times of COVID, even during times of home office, and even during times where money is short. AI can help you and data can help you. Use it, because it's very important in the years to come. These are two things that we try to tackle and where we really need to step up.
Great, Mr. Breit, thank you. So I'll come to Rahul, Mr. Sharma. You know, India prides itself on a wonderful set of initiatives that is putting a digital infrastructure in place. And we are doing so much that enables anybody who wants to innovate on that infrastructure. I know that there's a lot of that contribution that's coming from Amazon Web Services and the work that the public sector division of that is doing at the moment. So what are the highlights that you see that you're seen in India generally, and what AWS has driven in these areas of innovation?
Sure. I think one important thing I want to point out here, I think India has a fantastic base for digital innovation led by the government. When you think about all the excellent work, all the national platforms that the Ministry of IT has driven in collaboration with industry, in collaboration with different stakeholders, I think it sets up a very tremendous base on which to leapfrog on. In terms of one important factor, when you think about frontier technologies, when you think about machine learning, AI, IoT, blockchain, I think the need to experiment is paramount. I think that sort of defines the way you should go about deploying AI, machine learning, or any of these new frontier technologies. And experimentation is also linked to failure. I think you have to be able to fail quickly, fail without cost. And I think that's the one thing that we have been trying to bring in based on the experience that Amazon overall has with 20 years of doing innovation and 20 years of applying AI and machine learning. Amazon pretty much has machine learning applications in every sphere of its business. And that's been done by, largely through experimentation. And we've tried to bring that sort of mindset here. I think the government should also be close to startup innovation. There's a lot of work happening in startup innovation, but to be able to scale this going forward, that entire mindset of the experimentation and experiential approach is going to be really important. So when you think about, I'll give you the example of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. They wanted to put up the Indian Urban Observatory. And they came to us with a challenge and said, look, we have only a matter of a few weeks to be able to pull this together. And we said, no, absolutely. That's what the cloud is all about. The ability for you to be able to demonstrate with speed. And the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs with Mr. Kunal Kumar, working closely with Quantella, with Cisco and AWS, we in a matter of weeks put together the Indian Urban Observatory. And that created a repository of data that, that is open, available to startups, to innovation seekers to be able to use for multiple applications. When I also think about the work that we did for Maharashtra government, the Chief Minister's Challenge, the whole approach was, if we look at social impact areas, whether it's healthcare, whether it's agriculture, whether it's skilling, whether it's inclusion, can we start to pull and curate a set of startups that are working on machine learning and AI application in the space, working very closely with government stakeholders. So we actually instituted the Chief Minister's Challenge, where the secretaries and key stakeholders from government were involved in curating startups as a part of a hackathon. And the outcome was not just a one-off award, but a long-term project that the government would give. And I think those start to become some of the sort of longer-term projects that could be done. To end, I'll just talk about one example that is really close to my heart, which is very recent. And again, something that the industry all came together working very closely with the government was when we created the data platform for COVID. For the government of Telangana was one of the consumers, in fact, wherein we worked very closely with Mr. Jayesh Ranjan, and PM was involved there as well. I think that's where the power of really something that is tangible and workable comes to bear when you really think about the ecosystem. As Marco said, how do you get the entire ecosystem to work together? We are very quickly working with Fractal.ai, working with NASCOM. We actually, in a matter of, again, weeks, put together a data platform that was built, with hundreds of data sources. And the whole outcome was trying to make sure that the government had access to, in their war rooms, the best dashboards and the best prediction abilities. As you're going through the lockdown release, can you have the ability to look at and do scenarios of, if I have this sort of a lockdown release, what is the long-term outcome and long-term impact that it could have on medical facilities and resources and potential economic impact? And that ability to sort of play around with those dashboards based on real-time data. How do you open up institutions? How do you open up specific, industrial installations, as an example, or institutional areas or SEZs and all? And I think that, again, was done in a matter of a couple of weeks. And overall, I would say that it's been really heartening to work with government in some of these really innovative areas. And it's a sea change from a few years ago, and how I really love the kind of innovation that is being pushed by the government. And I think that's the really heartening thing to see, the openness and the need to drive innovation to be able to make citizen impact.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Sharma. Also, I think while it is easy to do this quickly, probably even cheaper than ever before, the sustainability of these projects going forward, what do you think would be that experience? I don't know how many such projects that you've kicked off have actually gone into kind of a scaling mode at the moment. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
So I think that's the whole point of doing the experimentation. I would say a number of these projects have actually gone into scaling. When you think about even the work that some of our partners is doing, the Cure.ai example, where they, based on the exam, they would do X-ray analysis, and they were doing this for the chest X-ray analysis. They quickly turned that model around and positioned it for COVID and said, in Mumbai, let's have a van standing outside the hospital. And as patients are coming in, you can just do a quick X-ray. And in a matter of minutes, be able to tell them that, whether you need to be diverted towards the ICU or can you actually be handled in the OPD. And if you just think about it's not something that happened overnight. The model was built with using chest X-rays over a period of a couple of years. But the fact that that data was available and the fact that they were able to quickly move that entire model towards the COVID side, I think that's where scalability comes in. So no longer are we thinking about 2-year, 3-year projects, or this is about, the world now is about 6 months to 8 months, 9 months sort of intervention. But the way the government is thinking about creating national platforms, and I'll just give you the example of Arogya Setu. A contact tracing app that was built in less than 2 weeks scaled to 160 million subscribers. It's over 160 million subscribers right now. And that, I think that kind of mindset of creation of national platforms is where I think the best power of technology can be brought to bear. So absolutely, I think this is the way forward. The government, Ministry of IT, is working on so many national platforms based on that example. I think that's really heartening to see. Yeah? And we are seeing a lot of scale.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. Thanks, Mr. Sharma. So I'll come to Professor Munam. I know we have spoken about this in the past, where there are multiple IITs. Each one of them is aspiring to have a data center. If some of them already have, some are aspiring to have, and each one of them is looking to specialize in some sector or some area so that they can deepen their understanding, deepen their research, and so on and so forth. I think research plays a very integral role in creating this infrastructure as we go along. So AI-led innovation. So I see that there is some of those happening pretty much through the initiative of the institutions. But how do you see this playing out and on a much larger basis, on a national basis here in India?
That's a very interesting question, Ravi, that you have put. And it's a very interesting thing that we actually are looking at. If you look at AI has been there for almost close to 5 decades. I mean, I remember when I was a student, I took an elective on AI. So it is that much back that we date back. So what has changed? And in fact, this point was brought out by our fellow panelist Rahul himself. I think over the years, what has changed is not the AI, but the applications that require AI, the availability of compute, the availability of research base, and availability of people who can actually fiddle around in various different application domains and apply AI. So it's really the application of AI that has actually grown. And I think the research today essentially gets that dimension. So if you look at the research, there are 2 aspects. One is the application, the other one is the technology. Now, whether it's a IoT or whether it's a blockchain or whether it is a deep learning or artificial intelligence or machine learning or variety of other things, all these things are technology space research, and this has been there for ages. The other spectrum, which is actually brought in immediately, is healthcare, AI in healthcare, agriculture, AI in agriculture, food security, AI in food security, supply chain management, AI in supply chain management, and industry, AI in industry, industry 4.0, defense, AI in defense, internal security, AI in internal security. I mean, how do we make the country more secure? I mean, that's itself is an AI solution. AI in weather prediction, AI in almost every kind of thing. And in fact, the latest one is AI in education. I mean, how do we impart education to people? Because not everybody is actually at the same pace. And each one of them actually provides a fuel to the research. Each one of them is actually an excellent research topic. And that's basically where the research spectrum is increasing. And institutions are actually catering to this kind of research. Now, I'll give you some more examples. I mean, AI is going to be pervasive. And going forward, and research is always to look forward. Going forward, there are going to be many more issues that will actually come up. For example, if AI is in commerce, one would actually question, is AI getting a bias? And is AI benefiting some people than others? How do you prove that AI is without bias? AI is actually working okay. I mean, as such, the program security itself becomes a big issue. And now we are beginning a notion where programs are learning by themselves. This becomes even bigger issue. So how do we actually say that it's a provable AI, it's an ethical AI, it's a responsible AI? And that's another major issue that will actually come up. And we should not actually remain, our competitor, our enemies, our people around us are also going to invest into AI sooner or later. Now, can AI be pitted against AI? Can there be a mechanism of competition of AI itself? So this is yet another research, another dimension of research that probably people are going to look at. Provable AI, AI against AI, AI for provability, AI for verifiability, and all these kind of things are actually going to take place. In fact, what we today talk of computing, probably in time to come, computing itself will change and we'll call AI. If you say computation in something, it will be AI in something. Computation in space, AI in space. Computation in medicine, AI in medicine. And this is exactly what is probably going to be the future. So research infrastructure has to grow, has to sustain the futuristic AI, and has to develop the futuristic AI. 4.5 decades of AI existence suddenly got speeded up, like a COVID exponential path. And in fact, I see COVID itself, the current pandemic situation itself an enabler for variety of these products. I mean, suddenly education became online. Suddenly exams became online. And I actually see quite a lot of competent people actually getting into this space. Within days, people actually set up video conferencing systems. That itself is an AI. And there's a kind of technology which has actually been there in video conferencing system is enormously, advanced technology. It's amazing technology. And this itself is actually an AI. And within few months, people could actually put up large platforms. In fact, Rahul talked about Arogya Setu, but there are so many other applications that people have come up with AI. I mean, I keep getting at least 2 to 3 mails every week. People giving us solution on exams and education of conduct of exam. I mean, suddenly exam became online. It was impossible to do offline. And now immediate concern is about the malicious intent of the people cheating in the exam and how do we handle it. And there's so many AI solutions that came up on supporting this. So today's time actually allows us to provide a very quick 3 to 4 months prototype of an AI space, an application in AI. And therefore, it's a never better opportune time for AI research where people can actually experiment with variety of ideas, variety of things, and create a prototype which was till now almost a very long drawn process. And therefore, AI in research, infrastructure for research is already becoming mature for that. And people are focusing more and more into application side AI. And I think to that extent, we all academic institutions are fully geared to take this challenge.
Professor Muna, thank you very much. That's a very, very nice way of describing how research is shaping AI. And I think we will all agree that we are still in the very beginnings of the journey with AI, and research will lead the path to getting to, exploring or unlocking the full potential of it. And it may be a long time to go. But my question to you once again as a follow-up is how do we guide what kind of research is actually going to be helping us towards the kind of social empowerment, more human-centric kind of developments of applications rather than that could be malicious. You spoke about some of those. These, of course, the applications you gave was in response to malicious intent, but how do we continue to make sure that it is responsible research, and how do we guide those efforts?
I think, again, that's a very important point. And as I earlier said, artificial intelligence or AI is to sustain the natural intelligence, to supplement the natural intelligence. And that's a statement which I want to now expand and say, this is all human-centric. Because anything that one finds as a handicap in handling some large data and learning it, intelligence out of it or learning, solutions out of it, AI techniques immediately come in handy. And this therefore makes people better aware of taking decisions, drawing out inferences from their own data and processes, and using that to define newer things. I mean, human-centric AI, by definition, AI has to be human-centric. And therefore, all the applications that we are talking of are actually close to AI. I mean, in fact, I will take one example. Government actually did focus quite a lot on drug discovery. Now, drug discovery, we have been looking at, viruses coming in and current pandemic. Is this the last virus? No, the answer is no. When will the next virus be? Answer, we don't know. But then are we ready to sustain the next virus? I think with our abilities, we are becoming better and better in this COVID situation. The current pandemic situation has definitely taught us how to handle situation much better. Okay. And probably we will be more intelligent, but definitely there is a huge notion of AI that has come in. The online systems, the technologies like data centers, the cloud, the IoTs, and everything has enabled us to actually carry on further. Almost every business is actually happening online with computing in background. So therefore, there is a huge thing that is happening. Now, I'm sure in time to come, we will actually speed up in certain other things so that we are able to handle this pandemic and these situations much better. So AI is human-centric. By definition, AI is human-centric. It is for the social benefit. It is for the social empowerment. It is for trying to figure out, how do we actually make people, who are actually in villages, in small towns, give them the exposure. And that exposure cannot be given anything better available to them, online education, online mechanism. Today, our artisans are actually able to sell their products over online systems anywhere in the country. Distribution channels, supply chain management has actually come in, and artificial intelligence supply chain management has enabled them. So in time to come, we are actually going to see more and more social empowerment, more and more AI for human-centric computing, and more AI for benefit of humanity.
Great. Thank you, Professor Muna. So we are coming up on time very quickly. So what I would like to do is just play the video that Mr. Fabian has sent us. So if I can have that, and post that, what I would request each one of you is to kind of do a quick summary of your thoughts on the future of what you would suggest to the government of India, MeitY, as to what are the things that we should keep in mind as we think about infrastructure-led AI infrastructure-led innovation. So could I request the organizers to please play the video?
Hello, greetings. My name is Chris Fabian, and I co-lead UNICEF Ventures, as well as UNICEF's new partnership with the International Telecommunications Union, GIGA. GIGA is an effort to connect every school in the world to the internet and is really very relevant to this session. Before I start, and I'll have about 5 minutes of remarks, I wanted to thank, first of all, the Ministry of Electronics and IT and the Government of India for hosting this session. And of course, Ravi, thank you for being the moderator. It's a pleasure to be here virtually, and I look forward to the next yearly meeting when we can all be in person. I wanted to give a few remarks about the work that we've been doing in the field of artificial intelligence or applied machine learning at the United Nations, at UNICEF, and particularly in our work on school connectivity. And I wanted to frame it within a few of the questions that Ravi had sent across by email earlier, which is really to start with a question about artificial intelligence in general as a term. It's a very difficult term because it means everything and nothing at the same time. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'd like to talk about sort of using some kind of complicated maths on top of a lot of data and applying that to real world problems. And to see what we've done with that inside of the UN system, I wanted to tell a bit of a story. There are about 50% of people in the world who don't have access to the internet, who don't have access to the tools that we may enjoy daily or not enjoy if you're stuck in endless Zoom meetings, one after another. The 50% of people who aren't connected don't show up on most artificial intelligence conference topics. They don't appear in the business plans of companies who are building the next generation of software. They don't provide sources of data except for maybe once in a very extractive way for any models that are being built. And we firmly believe at UNICEF that without creating technology that includes everybody in the world, we leave half of the world behind. And I wanted to briefly show you something before we get into that topic a little bit more. This is a map of the world, so I think we're all familiar with that. And this is a map of every school in the world and its connectivity. This project, Project Connect, is part of GIGA. This is a collaboration that we've been working on for several years with artificial intelligence startups around the world and machine learning experts. And I want to show you Colombia. So let's go to Brazil first. When we look at this map, so here's a map of Colombia, what we see are a lot of dots. Each of these dots is a school. So dots that are red are schools that have no connectivity at all in Colombia. dots that are green, while we're looking at Peru, let's go back to Colombia. Dots that are green on that map have very good connectivity. So there you can do a good Skype call or a Zoom call that's sort of 3G and above. And the dots in Colombia that are yellow have some limited connectivity. So here you see a picture of 60,000 schools. Each one of these schools has more information on it. You can zoom in and you can see a great deal more. But this map never existed 2 years ago. This type of data where you can actually see what the school is and how connected it is allows us to do a lot of things. It first of all allows us to see areas of great economic disparity. You can see where there are red schools without connectivity right next to green schools that kids are learning very differently. It allows us to also see on a map very clearly where we might need to focus our health efforts, where we might look at questions of where a disease is going to spread, where we might understand, and you can see in Brazil some of these maps too, some of these dots too with the green dots. You can see where a disease might spread. A disease will spread faster on the red dots in the schools without connectivity than it will in the green areas. It's because people have the ability to make a call, to report data, to produce information in the connected areas that they don't if they're disconnected. And this map, and all of the maps of Project Connect built around the world in various countries, allow us to see data in real time. They allow us to see how connected the entire world is. And that's only possible because of artificial intelligence. That map is generated by using many different layers of data, from satellite data to understand what a school looks like and where it might be located. And in Colombia, we located something like 7,000 schools in a national register that did not exist at the national level in one place before. It also allows us to add in data about connectivity, how connected a school is at a given moment. And that brings in information from mobile network operators and regulators, etc., all into one place. That data and the insights that come from it would have sat in various silos, would have lived in various places, and would never have been brought together for operational purposes 10 years ago. But the ability to use machine learning to train machines to scale up the work that humans would do hand, by village, and to do it at a national level, has allowed us to create a platform for monitoring school and community connectivity in any country in the world. And it's exciting because this is a practical in the public service, but also create opportunities for new jobs and new economies. You can imagine that a school that becomes connected connects a whole community, that creates all sorts of financial opportunities for small trade, for data to be sold back and forth, for people to be connected to digital finance, and all of the other things that come with connectivity. But if fundamentally we don't have the core, right, if we don't have the ability to understand where a school is or how connected it is, we would never be able to do a project as ambitious as Giga, which seeks to connect every school in the world to the internet. And so that's important for us because at an organization like UNICEF with 17,000 staff in 190 countries, we have a lot of questions that data can answer if the data is used correctly. And artificial intelligence or machine learning applied to some of these problems gives us potentially enormous leverage to address issues of the future. But we cannot build these solutions only in one place. They cannot be built only in Geneva or in San Francisco or in Beijing or in Delhi. These solutions, the models that drive this work, have to be built globally. And so the call that I would leave everybody with, and the last thing I want to just talk about briefly, is the idea of how we create algorithmic equity in the space of machine learning. The project that I showed you, and these many green dots representing schools around the world that are connected, wasn't built by one group of engineers. It was not a product that only came from one company or one country. The effort to create this machine learning platform came from several different startups that we've invested in over the last few years in countries around the world. And in fact, if we look at the map of Brazil or of Colombia, each one of these systems was originally prototyped and built by data scientists working in various countries on a common goal. And here you can see the map of Brazil. Again, just like Colombia, schools that are green have good connectivity, schools that have yellow have some, and schools that have red have none at all. But the platform for this was built globally. And it was built by data scientists with expertise in various contexts who understood the issues that their countries had in terms of data acquisition, in terms of how to use training data, in terms of how to negotiate with mobile network operators. And what our role was as an overall project as UNICEF was to start to bring together these great minds, these engineers and data scientists, and give them access to some global tools and an open source technology stack so that they could work together on this singular problem. And so as we look to algorithmic equity or data equity, we need to look at data and algorithms as digital public goods, as fundamental pieces of an infrastructure that can help advance all of humanity if we build it in an open source way and if we build it together. We've been very pleased with our collaboration with the government of Norway on a platform for digital public goods, which includes data, algorithms, models as those types of digital public goods. And of course, that's been in close collaboration with iSpirit in India and the technologists there who are working on the public stack of software that can help in countries around the world. So the request that I would leave with after this discussion is to think about how we can contribute not to singular projects in singular domains, but to creating the public architecture, the public infrastructure, and the open source pathways so that our data scientists can work and walk across various borders and collaborate on issues together. 2 weeks ago, we announced a key partnership with Ericsson, where their data scientists and machine learning experts will be working on scaling up Project Connect. You saw on the map that not every country has dots listed on it yet. And we'll be announcing other partnerships with major institutional providers, data science experts over the coming months. We would invite you to join us on this, but even if you're working on different types of work or different types of endeavors, to go and visit the Digital Public Goods Alliance. You can find that through a search online, to see the work that iSpirit has contributed and that Norway and other governments are building, and to be part of what I believe is the most significant journey for the next few years, to ensure that as we're developing new technologies, they are fair, open, and built in a way that they benefit everyone. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure to be here virtually.
That was fascinating video by Mr. Fabian. It's also very heartening to see that some of the work that's happening in India, the iSpirit work, is actually having global impact. Mr. Fabian talked about how we should be looking across the borders to building these infrastructures and collaborating and so on. But at the same time, I think we also would like to get your words of advice. If you can do it in 1 minute, if you could, as a summary, what is the advice you would give the government of India, METI, who's hosting this conference, to see what is the best way for us to go forward in building these infrastructure, AI infrastructure, so that we can generate the kind of innovation and solve the problems that we are looking to do here in India. So could I request Mr. Breit to start?
Thank you. I think the role of states is threefold. First and foremost, there is a thin line between fostering innovation and fostering trust, and both sides need to be taken into account. So a good and very clever regulation that faces these issues. The second thing states could do is to foster standardization and interoperability of services. And the third thing is that you should create a trustworthy environment for data collaborations, data spaces, and data spaces regulation, for example, that actually lowers the entry barriers of businesses, especially small and medium businesses, to share the data, to process data together, to reap the fruits that the data offers. And then I think that this is the basic function, the basic things that states could do to foster innovation, especially in data and AI. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Breit. Could I request Mrs. Schreier to take a minute to summarize your advice for us?
Yeah, India already has a great AI strategy and frankly, a committed leadership from the very top of the country, the Prime Minister down, and that is essential, that sponsorship and provides air cover and frankly, inspiration underneath that. But now India needs just to continue to invest. right? The early adopters of AI infrastructure will be the main producers of it as well. And this will lead to an insurmountable advantage. You can see in commercially how this is already playing out with countries, with companies that are essentially defining and leading markets. And geopolitically, the outcome will be less binary. I mean, there won't be so many winners as losers. It'll be a lot more nuanced, but the strongest economies boosted by the most profitable industries will be the countries that have made those investments early. And, we were very proud to announce on Monday that we'll be building the largest AI supercomputer in India with CDAC in partnership with Atos. And it is that kind of commitment, it's that kind of action that will lead to India to be able to follow through on its ambition to be the AI garage for its neighbors, for the developing world, right? Improving the human condition far beyond its borders. We think that's a really good plan.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stryer. Now I come to the last two of my fellow panelists. And remember, when you give the advice, you may be asked to also implement it. So with that, I would request you to give your advice as well, Professor Muna.
I think two things which are very important in order for have the AI move forward. One is education and the talent, and the other one is compute. And both of these, have very strong connect with the educational institute. Talent, development of talent itself is a educational institution. But in order to do this, exposure to real compute, whether it's on cloud, whether it is on supercomputing, whether it is on IoT and all that, is the hunger of this compute is much, much higher in educational institutes. And unfortunately, these are also the organizations which are always starving for computation. So this is something, a very strong ecosystem can be built if we have proper resources, proper infrastructure available for education so that the future leaders of technology can actually implement it in their own workspaces. So this is basically going to help in both ways, both in terms of talent as well as infrastructure.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor Muna. Mr. Sharma?
I just want to say, as an Indian, I'm really proud that the government of India has taken the flag of AI for social good as a global initiative. I think that's the opportunity that India has to stand for AI for social good across the world. And some of the platforms, some of the work that is happening today in India, I think can and will benefit the world and developing countries. And we at AWS are very happy to partner with the government of India to be able to help take some of these platforms and solutions globally. So I feel really proud as an Indian to be associated with a number of these initiatives. So thank you so much for the honor and the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sharma. I think we have had a fantastic set of insights from all of you all across the world, and also people who are already working on the ground in India and pulling it all together, and also understanding that not only are we doing something which are like global best practices, but we're also contributing to the world in terms of how data sciences is contributing to various social causes across the world as well. I think it's a good time for us to take stock, and I think we have the ability now to shape our journey going forward, and look forward to the organizers of this conference to take these pieces of advice that we may have given, and we are, I think, also willing to work with you in implementing some of this as we go along. So with that, I would like to turn it back to Mr. Gaur and thank all the panelists, fellow panelists, for the wonderful discussion.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
So thank you so much,
Thank you.
Mr. Ravi Narayan, for having an excellent session with all the panelists. I think it was a very fruitful one for us here in Government of India towards policy making and developing the requisite infrastructure. I think your thoughts on harnessing data and infrastructure to keep pace with the acceleration of data generation are very pertinent. Similarly, I would also like to thank Marco Breit and the thoughts that he gave on developing ecosystem while we look at regulation and the fact that infrastructure investment and ecosystem development have to go hand in hand as we go ahead. I also thank Mr. Keith Stryer for his thoughts on decision making and action. Thank Professor Rajat Moona. He's an integral part of the decision making paradigm. And let me also assure him that he'll not be starved, and he and his ilk will not be starved for compute power as we keep our focus on education and research. In fact, the implementation plan has a very strong focus on CORES, which is the Centers of Research Excellence, where academic institutions will be supported in a big manner. I would like to thank Mr. Rahul Sharma for his thoughts on clouds and solutions, and the fact that they've been coordinating with, for example, I'm also personally involved with what is happening around IUDX and the entire urban stack and the urban innovation framework, and so on, also in the health sector, and so on and so forth. I also thank Mr. Christopher Fabian for his excellent video presentation. I think the dashboard that he had shown, I'm sure many such dashboards will involve as we have more and more data and visualizations. To conclude, I believe both physical as well as social infrastructure need to be developed, and capacity building, like many of you pointed out, is very important. And ultimately, I believe we have to have a collaborative approach where government will be able to probably put the facilitative ecosystem in place, but we have to work in collaboration with industry and academia to take this AI-led innovation forward. So with this, I conclude today's session. I believe the event, RAISE 2020 event, gives us a great opportunity to proliferate the adoption of AI in a socially responsible and an ethically conscious manner. I would again urge the global community of professionals in emerging technologies and enthusiasts of AI and such artifacts to remain involved with the sessions as we enter the last day of RAISE. Tomorrow we have some great sessions coming up tomorrow again, and I would look forward to seeing all of you in the panel, as also other people who are watching us across the globe. We have leveraging AI for pandemic preparedness, which I believe some of you talked about. We have from data rich to data intelligent nations. How can countries navigate these kind of waters? And we have a discussion on data consent mechanisms, as well as on the role of government in the AI enablement. So these are some of the sessions that are coming up tomorrow. With this, I thank all of you again and have a good time ahead. Thank you.
Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful panel discussion. And I would like to also thank Ravi Narayan for conducting it so well. Thank you.
Yes, it was great done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaskar.